Hey guys, Stockaholics, appreciate you guys hanging out today. A lot of the times on this channel, I have kind of a contrarian view. Some of the stuff I talk about is kind of doom and gloom sometimes, not always. But for today, I'm going to have a different approach. We do want to stay open-minded. And this is how you know that we are in for a stock market peak. And that is because I'm going to be talking about something bullish today. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about demographics and predicting the stock market. In this case, demographics a lot of time can mean different groups of people. In this case, we're going to be referring to a category of age and how those age demographics can actually predict somewhat reliably what kind of a market you're going to be in, at least in the long term. Now we're also going to show you, I'm also going to show you why millennials are going to make the next decade great again. And that has something to do with these demographics and some of the things that we have seen recently in their behaviors. Now, first of all, I want to give credit where credit is due. I didn't come up with this idea. Recently, I saw a video from a very intelligent man named Mr. Tom Lee, and this was his original idea.
Like, what would you tell someone are the most important things to look at to understand why the markets are doing what they're doing?
At Fundstrat, we'd say that there's a couple cornerstones of our research process. The first is we do evidence-based research, so we really don't want to say something unless history can show it or we can show some correlation or probabilities.
Okay, so you look at historical returns.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's largely driven by demographics. So believe it or not, population has explained almost every bull market cycle since 1900. So if you just took births and broke it up into 20-year generations and then mapped when each of these 20-year generations peaked, the greatest generation peaked in 1974, the silent generation peaked in 1930, the boomers peaked in 99, Gen X peaked in 2018.
Okay.
Every major market top has coincided with a generational peak.
All right, so this kind of explains the main idea, I think, for Tom's idea in that the population can impact or be a predictor of which way the stock market is going to go. So you can see here, based on this graph, and by the way, this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I believe this chart was created, obviously, by Morgan Stanley. And what we're looking at here is consumption habits or spending habits in dollar amounts in the United States based on age. And yes, life expectancies over time have been increasing, but overall human behavior, it doesn't really change too much. All right, so you can see here that under 25-year-olds, they don't tend to spend a lot of money. Makes sense. A lot of those people are, in this day and age, they're kind of still dependents. What they are probably spending a lot of their money on would be this piece here, that education dynamic, right? As they get older, however, and they become full-fledged adults in our society, their spending increases, right? And these are the millennial categories that we're seeing today. As they get even older in their 30s and late 40s until about the age 50, their spending peaks. Now you think about this age group here, their spending habits, what are they spending money on? A lot of this is they're starting to buy houses, right? Maybe they're buying transportation. You can see they're spending more on cars and things like that, right? Now there's two main groups, especially when we look at the population in the United States, that suggests where the market was and where the market is going. And the first group, the classic setup we have here, is the boomers. Now the boomers are getting old. They're spending what they're retiring, or if they are retired already, if they are not. They are spending less and less as people get older in their lives. They tend to save more, they tend to spend less, okay? And a lot of that has to do, well, they've already purchased, maybe a lot of them have already purchased their homes, and they have less expenses. Now they're beginning to sell their stocks to kind of live for their retirement or whatever their plans may be. Yep. At the same time, the other relevant category in this idea are the groups known as the Millennials, a group in which I am in. And as millennials are getting a little bit older, their incomes are projected to increase, and their spending is likely to increase as they purchase more of those things like housing and transportation. And one other thing I'd like to mention is, I guess, based on my research on the monetary system, and that is that when spending peaks, the money supply increases. So if we're thinking about this generation in terms of millennials and them getting into these later categories in their late 30s and 40s, and they're spending more money in the economy, we can think of a lot of the debt that they're going to be generating in terms of housing, credit cards, or whatever they're doing is going to be likely increasing the monetary supply. And we can see in some of their recent behavior in the past months that a lot of these millennials are very likely to invest some of that increased money supply into the stock market. Okay, but before we talk about the United States, I would like to actually make a case point about how demographics can suck. So we're going to look at Japan, and we're going to look at the Nikkei 225. And this is going to kind of exemplify how important population dynamics really can be for the accumulation of wealth in a nation's stock market. So here you can see that we have a chart from approximately 1985. Some of that might be cut off for you guys with my big fat head, all the way until the year 2021. Now you can see that there was a massive run up into about the year 1990, and then subsequently there was a large bear market in the Japanese stock market until about the year 2012, and then it's ran up again a little bit, but nowhere near to the levels that it had ever seen in those 90s years. So this stock market is used often to kind of exemplify what a bear stock market can look like. Now I'd like you guys to think for a second, well, first of all, what drives stock prices? Often people think of these things in terms of like PE ratios or different other ways to measure a stock's price, but ultimately what drives a stock's price is someone's willingness to purchase that stock. If people are willing to bid up a stock, the stock price will increase. If there are less people willing to buy a stock and more people willing to sell a stock, well, the reverse scenario will happen, and there will be more people, the price will go down, right? In this scenario, we can see that, we're going to look at this in a second, there was something that caused this scenario here and then the subsequent scenario we see here, yeah? A lot of times we may think of economies as either booming or busting, but we don't think about what is happening. You know, we might say, well, it's the central bank or it's interest rates, but you know, ultimately these could just be a symptom, and really the population dynamics could actually be the cause. And to kind of show you guys that, this is Japanese population over time. And over here we have 3 age groups. You can see this isn't as detailed as some of the other graphs, but in any case, I think it shows the point. This blue section, dark blue down here, are very young people. This group here from age 15 to 64 is this central area here, and then that aging portion of the population is this portion over here. Now you can see in Japan, overall, there's something that happened. There was a peak in population in approximately 2010, and then it's projected actually to decline and continue to decline over the next coming decades. Yeah, you can, in Japan, you can see there was a spending age peak. So if we think about those populations, the behavior of humans as they get into those 40s and 50s, we can see this group here, this very important spending group, peaked at the same time that the Nikkei 225 peaked in the year 1990. This is a chart from Bloomberg, and it's showing you here the Dow Jones Industrial Average from the year 1900 all the way to today. Okay, and we're going to see here that in 1930 there was a stock market peak. There was a peak in 1970s. There was a peak in 2000, and there was a peak, some people believe, in 2018. This was more of a kind of a sideways market in any case. But if we look at this in terms of those peak populations, in terms of how many people reached those mid 40s and 50s, we can see that there was a decline in those populations in the 1930s. There was a decline over here in the silent generation. The boomers peaked in 1999. And again, those Gen X reached those peak ages in 2018. So some attribute this bear market here, especially when I think about things in terms of the monetary system. They say, well, it has to do with raising interest rates. So, but the more I think about it in terms of population dynamics, the more that I realize that this is probably more likely the cause. It is just changes in population. And if one of the ways that we can know that to be true is that the Federal Reserve is more of a reactionary agency. It doesn't try and predict things. It just sees things happening in the market and tries to adjust based on those, right? So if we think about millennials and the economy over here coming into the future, it's going to suggest that there is a very likely extreme bull market going to be coming over the next decade based on these populations. All right, so I'd like to show you guys this. This is the resident population of the United States by sex and age as of July 1st, 2019, and it is measured in millions. By the way, this is from Statistica. That is where I got this chart. And I'd like you guys to notice on this chart there are two areas demonstrated by my beautiful red arrows over here, where we can see that there is a population spike. Okay, we see two population spikes. One is the boomers, that is the one down here. The other is the millennials. This is the one over here. This biggest population, which is the category from 25 to 29, this biggest population band is set to hit 50 in approximately 15 years. So if we're looking at this population increase that we're going to see in these spending age, consumer age adults, and the things they're going to be buying, it's suggesting that we are likely to head into a period of economic expansion. And a lot of what these people do as they get into these age brackets, well, what do? They tend to buy stocks, right? So there's one other thing that I would like to point out here as well. In some of these other categories, like the boomers, for example, you notice that these male population, these are the ones, by the way, on the left-hand side, these light blue, and the female populations are the one on the right-hand side of the dark blue. I don't know why they chose light blue for male. I would have flipped it the other way around. But in any case, I want you guys to look at these numbers here. So we can see over here, this male in relation to female population is lower, right? And this is kind of a trend we see in some of these older populations. A lot of that may be because these populations got into some very serious conflicts that us millennial generation, well, we didn't have the unfortunate experience to have to go through things like that, right? At least to this scale as some of the other generations, yeah? And I want you to kind of look at what's happening with the male to female ratio in this category as well. We're seeing that males are actually outpopulating females in these categories. Now, why am I bringing this up? I think this is important because one other thing that I know about male and female investing habits is that males, and I think this has a lot to do with biology, by the way, males are more willing to take on risk. And because they're more willing to take on risk, that means they're more likely to invest. So if we see that there is a spike in these male population in this increasing population of relative to the former generation, it suggests to me that there could be a very strong bull market. Okay, so I'd also like to show you guys this article. This is from the Wall Street Journal, written by Caitlin McCabe about a year ago. And the article is entitled, "A New Army of Individual Investors Flexes Its Muscle." More than 10 million new brokerage accounts were opened in 2020 as individuals piled in to bet on stocks. Now, I will tell you, both from personal experience and by looking at the data, that the vast majority of these accounts were not opened by boomers or by Gen Xers, but in fact were opened mostly by millennials and to some extent Zoomers, Gen Z. The online brokerage industry might be hard-pressed to outdo the record-breaking year it experienced in 2020, but for now, few are betting against it. Individual investors opened more than 10 million new brokerage accounts in 2020, JMP Securities estimates, a record. Interest isn't fading either. App downloads for brokerage firms, while lower than earlier in the year, remain resilient, with the Robinhood Markets Inc. app expected to reach 500,000 downloads in December alone, data provided by the investment bank shows. So this is a huge amount, but it does pale in comparison to some of the volume of accounts opened earlier in the year. And a lot of that had to do, I believe, as most people probably do, that was because, a lot of millennials were trapped at home. They're stuck. Maybe they were even laid off their job. They were collecting unemployment. They couldn't spend money on some of the things that they normally might, and they instead decided to invest some of that money in a lot of very speculative, but nonetheless investments in the stock market. Yeah. Website traffic for well-entrenched brokerages, including TD Ameritrade Holding Corp. and E-Trade Financial, continued to increase as well. So we saw across-the-board increases on most of the apps. Robinhood is probably the quintessential or stereotypical millennial investment app, at least for the year of 2020. You have this incredibly engaged customer, said Devin Ryan, senior research analyst at JMP Securities. It appears that the end customer is actually logging into their account more than they were at the beginning of the pandemic. And we've seen a lot of volatility this year. And a lot of that has to do with the crazy amount of millennials that have gotten involved. 2020 will be known as the year that individual investors dove into financial markets and doubled down, even in the midst of a global pandemic, strapping in for a roller coaster ride that sent stocks plummeting and then skyrocketing in a record time. So I'd also like to show you some more anecdotal evidence to suggest that millennials have been driving the market, at least in the year of 2020. One of those biggest high-flying stocks is Tesla. And if you look at some of the data of some of the people who own Tesla, I think roughly 80% of Tesla is owned by millennials. So you see that huge piling in of all of these very ecstatic millennial investors. Well, a lot of them have been piling into very similar securities. Another one of those, I believe, is the security known as Bitcoin. And we've seen all of these millennials very ecstatic with not a lot of places to put their money, getting involved in something like this. Yeah. And if you think about anything that is stereotypically associated with a millennial, if you think about the coffee, you think about their avocado spiced latte or whatever the flip you think is associated with a millennial and their interests. If you look at the stocks that you would think would be associated with them, they have all been high flyers this year. And this suggests to me that, millennials are really starting to get involved in the stock market. Anything stereotypically associated with millennials and their interest has surged the past year. You can look up any of these stocks. Starbucks, Twitter, if you look at the population dynamics on Twitter, they mostly are millennials. Apple, Amazon, a lot of the people who are ordering on Amazon these days, Netflix, and electric vehicles. A lot of the college education has focused on these kinds of things and the problems with global warming. And who has been most interested in this kind of a dynamic? Well, it's been millennials. Yeah. Now, if you're going to ask my opinion, anytime we see these kind of hockey stick patterns, that's these huge growth spikes, well, they don't tend to end well. And I do believe that well, yes, I believe millennials are likely to get burned by their short-term investment decisions. They don't seem to be based on reasonable or rational decisions. But I do think it's not all negative. Yeah, I think they're going to get burned in the short term. I actually think that when the economy opens and to its normal levels, and we see that millennial spending habits can resume, a lot of this money is going to go away. And there are some other reasons that I think this is going to happen, and that has to do with student loans coming due. It has to do with other loans that have been in forbearance. Now, this doesn't affect the millennials as much as the prior generation, but all of these things are things to consider, yeah. And this, although most of these movements might have been made by millennials, it doesn't mean that all of the movements have been, right? But yeah, I do believe, there's going to be a correction, and sometime in 2021. That's just a personal opinion. I could be wrong, but I think that millennials, they're going to learn a lot from this experience, and they're going to learn a lot from the experience that they had in 2020. And I don't think that this is just a one-off event. I think that these brokerage accounts that represent millennials' behavior is only going to increase over time as these millennials become full-fledged adults, begin owning houses, begin reaching their income potentials in their late 40s and 50s. Yeah. So they're eventually going to learn, and because I think that's going to happen, I think that the next decade overall is going to flourish because of them. Hey, so if you made it this far and you found this content useful, I'd appreciate a like. Thanks for hanging out. If you'd like to see more content like this, consider subscribing, and let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think this population stuff holds water? Do you think the millennials will drive the markets in the next decade? Or are millennials just a bunch of no good, nothing for nothings? And they won't drive markets like some of this data would suggest. Anyways, take it easy.